Hello to my YouTube channel that I haven't talked to in so long. I've been wanting to film this for a while, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I'm at my grandma's right now with the doggos. This is Jazz. And I wanted to tell you about all the books that I read in 2021. I'm just gonna say what I remember because I'm recording on my phone right now and I don't have my computer or anything to write things down, so I'm just gonna have to go to Goodreads when I can't remember anymore. The latest book that I read was Slaughterhouse-Five, the graphic novel, and I will put somewhere who illustrated the graphic novel. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that Kurt Vonnegut is my favorite author of all time. I think he is fascinating, and I love the way he kind of has his own like Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's like a Vonnegut Cinematic Universe kind of, where lots of characters show up in different books and things like that. So I am a big fan of his, and I didn't know there were any graphic novel adaptations of his work, but I love graphic novels. I've taken comics class last summer, and then this semester I'm taking a French comics class, which in French, if you're curious, they call it bande dessinée, which literally means like drawn strips. I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna read some Moebius and Tintin, Hergé, and lots of different French comics, and the French are like also a huge part of the comic world, so I'm really excited about that. So I read Vonnegut's graphic novel form of Slaughterhouse-Five, which was so fun because like Slaughterhouse-Five isn't my favorite of Vonnegut's. I think it's a little bit like overhyped, just because like that's the one that's the most realistic, and I'm someone that likes Vonnegut for the sci-fi, so I feel like Slaughterhouse-Five has never been my favorite, but getting to see it through this new lens, and like even like the artistic style wasn't even like my favorite, it still was like so compelling, and I think it really worked for the book. I really loved it. I recommend it, and if you're a Vonnegut fan, I think you'll enjoy it. Oh, then was probably Dune Messiah. So I read Dune and Dune Messiah. I read Dune before I even knew there was a movie coming out earlier this year, and just because I love sci-fi and I'd heard about it as a sci-fi fan for a really long time, so I picked it up and I fell in love with it. I listened to the audiobook for the first one because it is really dense, especially if you're not a sci-fi person. Like, it will come off really intense because it also has all of these religious elements, because it's trying to create a religious universe as well as a political universe. So that's something to be aware of going into it. I thought it was great, and then I think the second book actually made me appreciate the first one more, because in the second book you get more development of the female characters. So that was really interesting to me, because that was one of my big complaints with the first one, is that I just felt like it was so male-centric that it got a little bit annoying. And so I really liked that kind of adjustment, and I'm hoping that with the movies it'll follow a similar pattern, where the second movie will really bring us up to speed with the female characters and give them more depth, because the first book and movie really focus on Timothée Chalamet's character. I can't think of his name. Paul. Oh, I read Seth Rogen's Yearbook. That's a memoir series of kind of short essays. That I rated pretty low. I think it's really easy to read, so it was perfect for me during final season, but it really does read like a script, and he writes comedy scripts, so they're really easy to read, and it's really like quick and fluffy and light. So definitely I would not say don't expect a whole lot of depth from it. You get some interesting stories about various rappers and celebrities. It's fun, light read. If you like Seth Rogen, you'll probably like it. I have mixed feelings about him, so didn't hate it though. I read lots of Virginia Woolf this year for various classes, and I thought I liked Virginia Woolf because I liked A Room of One's Own, but her novels have not really got to me. I just didn't find them all that compelling, and I wasn't like, I never found myself wanting more, because she's just so dense and there's just so much to analyze. So especially if you're reading it for class, it just feels so heavy, so much work. So not my favorite of the year. I read a little bit of Henry James, which was kind of boring, but Maisie knew, but I think that might have been the class's fault, not the books. I read lots of great comics, including Stuck Rubber Baby, which is really interesting. That up, I can't remember the author at the moment, but he's a white gay dude and he writes a lot about the civil rights movement and the gay rights movement when he was growing up, which is really interesting, especially from his perspective and especially racially, because like he got a lot of criticism as a white man writing about it, because lots of people say that he kind of wrote it too idealized version of the time, and he says that's the way I experienced it, so that's what I showed, which I think is fair, but also I think it's important to recognize so much of the darkness as well that comes with that time period. But the art is incredible. It's all black and white, but it's really beautiful. So I do recommend it if you're into the history of comics at all also. I also read My Friend Dahmer, which was really fun. That was one of my favorite comics that I read this year. It's really interesting. I didn't like the movie nearly as much, but the comic is really fascinating. I love true crime. I've had a newfound interest in true crime this year as well. Continuing now, also read The System, which is really interesting. I think it's a wordless graphic novel. So that one's also like spray painted, so it's really cool because you get this really interesting artistic style as well. So I highly recommend that. If you're interested in art also, I think you'll like that. And it's very like anti-police and very left-wing, so in my opinion it's aged very well. Oh, I also read the entire Twilight series. I didn't read some of the newer sequels, but I read the original series and that was really fun. I read a lot of it on audiobook gardening and it's just such a fun, fluffy, light read, so if you're a student it is really fun. And I'd always thought the movies were really funny and dumb, and the books were just as funny and dumb and entertaining, so I do recommend those if you like light and silly young adult fiction. And I like vampire stuff, so I thought it was fun. So I also read I Want You by Lisa Hannawalt. I think I talked about one of her books on here before. I think Coyote Dog Girl I talked about, so I can link that somewhere, but she is the artist behind BoJack Horseman and Tuca and Birdie, the TV shows, and I just think her art is really cool. I've always been drawn to it, and this one is a collection of lots of like scraps of work from before she kind of made it, so it's kind of cool because you get kind of a darker version of some of her work than I feel like you normally do, and it's very raunchy and dirty and gross, and I enjoyed that a lot about it. Very visceral and fun read. Oh, I also read, it's called Wine Simple. Very like graphically told, and the paper is gorgeous. It's expensive, but my mom bought it for me as a gift. And as someone that turned 21 recently, I've been having so much fun learning about wine and trying things out and expanding my palate. So if you have any interest in wine, I think it's a very approachable, interesting thing. It's very dense, but so is the history of wine. You can't exactly blame it for being dense because the history of wine is also very dense, but I think it's really interesting and has expanded my world for sure. And also, like, I'm the kind of person that like I want to just read a book about something and learn about it, and that's my entry into that world. Turning 21, this has been a great like vehicle for my learning in drinking and wine, and it's been making me consider becoming a sommelier because there's also a lot of language in that world. I also read Le Ravissement de Lord Stein, which is a famous novel in French by Marguerite Duras. It's really fascinating, very psychological. I read it for 2 classes this year, actually. So I recommend that if you like French and you haven't read it yet. And it's pretty approachable as a beginning French learner, but my translation of it was not great. I also read and wrote a paper on The Emigrants by W.B. Sebald, or W.E. Sebald, which is really interesting. I read that cover to cover, which for class I don't always get the chance to, and it's a really interesting look at emigrating, at family, at the Holocaust. I'd never heard of it before, but it certainly should be a classic. It also has a lot of really interesting use of photography, so if you like art history or graphic novels, it might appeal to you in that way. It's definitely not like a light read, but it's short and it's like the writing is good, so it's easy to read even if it's not light, if that makes sense. This is one I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but since I haven't really been doing videos I didn't get a chance to. But I loved this year Heaven No Hell, which is a graphic short story collection kind of It's really fascinating. I think it's published by Drawn and Quarterly, which is one of my favorite like comic publishers. It's so cool. The art is really trippy and psychedelic, really fun and colorful, deals with lots of like existential questions. It's pretty dark. There's probably some suicide, so trigger warnings for that, but I definitely recommend it if you like dark graphic novels. But I also love that it was short stories, because during the school years I love reading short story collections because I don't need to like remember a lot to go back to it. So I definitely recommend that one. I was so excited to talk about it when I read it because I think it's beautiful. I might record some other clips of me showing the graphic novels because I really read some beautiful ones this year, and I do want to kind of show them off so that you can see how gorgeous they are, which will hopefully make you want to read them. I also read Miko Kawakami's Breasts and Eggs this year, which is a novel following 3 women, 2 sisters, and one of the sister has a daughter. The daughter is going through puberty and has just started dealing with that and becoming a woman and questioning her womanhood. Simultaneously, she decides to be silent. She finds it pointless to speak with her mother because her mother will just always find something wrong with it, if I remember right. And so her and her mother have a lot of conflict, and she speaks at school but not with her mother. So that's really interesting, like the silence aspect of it, because it is also, it feels like a quiet novel, which is always something that I think is really fascinating when writing can evoke that feeling of silence, because writing to me, I still hear it in my head, you know, so I think that's a really impressive feat. And yeah, this one is really interesting. It's a slow burn and it doesn't have a huge chaotic ending, which kind of bothered me because I felt like it was building to something and it never like released quite right, but I did really enjoy it. I loved the characters. One of the characters is maybe asexual or something, so there's a lot with sexuality or lack thereof. And then the other one, her kind of feminine struggle in the novel is that she's dealing with like whether or not she's going to get a breast job. And then the other character is dealing with whether she wants to have children by herself. So that's where the breasts and eggs come from. So I think it's really interesting, especially as a woman, and especially as a woman personally who's very interested in like womanhood across borders, because it's, you know, culturally womanhood is very different wherever you are. So I'm particularly interested in like Japanese womanhood, so I really loved it. And especially as someone who like as a Westerner, I think you're exposed to a lot of like Murakami, and then through him you see writers like him, but often you don't see their female counterparts like Kawakami, who's only recently become famous in the States, because, you know, Murakami is so male-centric and often so misogynistic, and I love his writing despite that, but I'm always looking for writers that I love and are less problematic. So there's one for you. Highly recommend her, and I want to read some of her other works. She's become famous for being a blogger, I'm pretty sure, in Japan. Okay, one of the other kind of really wild graphic novels I read this year was Junji Ito's Love Sickness. If you like horror, if you like manga, if you like graphic novels, you will like this. It's really dark and gross, and I loved it for that. Really creepy in the best ways. The only thing is I felt a little bit out of it. I wasn't sure if I missed like the first book or something, but there were bits and pieces I felt like I was missing. But I definitely want to read more of his work, and he's like super famous manga artist in Japan and in the comics world. Then I read The Princess Bride, which is really great. I enjoyed it a lot as just kind of a fun fairy tale style book to read. I definitely would have rather like read it to a kid or something, because by myself it was hard to like keep my interest in it, I guess, but I see myself rereading that in the future for sure. Next, I read a book that I've been wanting to read for years, which was My Favorite Thing is Monsters. This I can't recommend highly enough. It's huge and expensive, but if you like comics at all or art, it's worth it. The art is gorgeous. Like, every single page makes me want to put it as a poster on my wall. She's so freaking talented, and the story is great. It's kind of a mystery, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out. Then I also read Kindred, the graphic novel, which was really fun as an adaptation because I had read Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and that's fantastic. I highly recommend. I still think I like that one better because Kindred, I already knew the story because I'd heard of it, so it didn't feel so new and fresh and interesting to me. Parable of the Sower is like some of my favorite sci-fi I've ever read, especially because it also takes place in LA and it incorporates like the freeways and drought and nature and environmental activism and race and gender and like tackles so many things seamlessly. I love that book. And religion, and I love when sci-fi has religion in it because that's not something that's going to go away. It's very human of us, and so I think it's important to incorporate that in our future. Kindred, though, is very interesting. It deals with a woman who, actually, I don't want to spoil it because that was one of my issues with it, so I won't spoil any of it. It's a graphic novel and novel, both dealing with race and time travel, is all I'll say. I think it's really fascinating. The writing is great. I didn't love the graphic novel style, really. The art didn't appeal to me a lot. It felt kind of fan fiction-y. Similarly to the way I felt about the Slaughterhouse-5 adaptation, where they just felt so cartoony that I couldn't, it took me out of it a little bit, maybe? I don't know. Because I like animation style, artistic cartoony, and then I like cartoon, but when it's still trying to look too human, but it's not there. It's too in between. It looks like Diary of a Wimpy Kid or something. I don't know. I don't know what that is that I'm trying to place, but something about it bothers me. Anyway, I recommend the graphic novel, especially because it was a really quick way to consume that, and it's definitely a heavy book, so I bet you could get through it faster in graphic novel form. Then I read Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths, which is a graphic novel about a group of soldiers in World War II, and they're forced to stay on this island and basically sentenced to their deaths and go on a suicide mission, essentially. And the art is crazy. It really straddles cartoony and realistic in a really interesting way and uses those as very deliberate choices in, I think, a perfect way. So I very much enjoyed that. Definitely want to read more of his work. Really talented guy and writer. The writing's great as well. Okay, I also read The Red Badge of Courage, which I don't want to talk about because I thought it was dumb. Not a big fan of that one. And then the one I do want to talk about, though, is Understanding Comics, which I think if you have no grasp of graphic novels or how impactful and fascinating the world of comics is, this is what I would recommend. It opens your eyes to how time works in comics, how the theory of comics, and the whole world that's there that you can access as long as you read some of them. So I highly recommend that. Okay, I think I made a video about the Testaments, so I'm not going to do a whole thing here. I read the Testaments also, which I do recommend if you like The Handmaid's Tale, though I thought the ending was disappointing. Then I read A Contract with God. The author, Will Eisner, is super famous in the comics world, and he's such a great artist, and he uses rain and light in a really interesting way, so I love his work. This is about tenement buildings and Jewish people living in New York, so I thought that was really interesting. Really sad, dark stories, but really well done. And then I read Hood Feminism, which I think is a great alternative to How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I didn't think actually taught you how to be an anti-racist. I thought it was very much just regurgitating critical race theory, which is great. White people need critical race theory, but I think there are better ways to do it that don't feel so preachy and that people will be more receptive to. And also I felt Ibram X. Kendi was really limited in his views of other identities, and so I think that Hood Feminism does a much better job of being an intersectional look at feminism. That's really what it aims to do, and it does it. I think it's really fascinating. It's a great read. She's a great writer. Highly recommend that. Yeah, I think that's all of my books of 2021. If you want to see any more about me, you can look at my Goodreads to see what I'm reading. You can follow me on Instagram and subscribe to me here. I will keep trying to make more videos, but it's not going to be consistent until I'm done being a student. That's just the reality of it. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Those are the books I read this year, but I will read more next year. I'm currently reading Things Fall Apart, which I read before for school, and I'm reading it for class now, so I'm happy about that. I'm also reading Happy Hour, which is a really fun Sex and the City style novel. Thanks for watching.